Larry Siegel, and a great pleasure today to introduce and discuss the work of James Allen Fox, who I would say is the most well-known criminologist in the United States. So it's really exciting for me to be here with him because he's, in my field, a huge celebrity. And he is the Lipman Family Professor of Criminology at Northeastern University in Boston. And I'd just like to tell you a quick story. In 1977, I was on the faculty at Northeastern, and when Dr. Fox applied for a job. And I always tell this story for many years to students, and he had a letter from Marvin Wolfgang, because he had attended the University of Pennsylvania where Wolfgang was the director. And Marvin Wolfgang was the most famous criminologist in the world. And the letter started out by saying, James Allen Fox is the best student I ever had. And we all looked at each other and decided to hire him. Because when Marvin Wolfgang said that, it wasn't something to take lightly. And I always tell students after that, if you can get a letter like that when you apply for a job, you better, because it really carries a lot of weight. Now, when Dr. Fox was first hired, he was hired to teach stat and methods. And while a lot of people see him as the leading expert in the country on murder, when he started his career, he was actually a statistician and a quantitative analyst. And that made me feel really happy because those are the courses I taught, which I didn't want to, because everybody hates the stat teacher. And since then, his incredibly distinguished career has taken off. He has authored 18 books, including more than a few on statistics and methods, including quantitative criminology and forecasting crime data and so on. In addition to that, he's also published a plethora of books on his field, which is multiple murder, including the Gainesville student murders, explaining senseless murder, and other books. In addition to that, he's published many journal articles and hundreds of columns in newspapers around the country, including USA Today, where he serves on the board of contributors. And without any question, regardless of all his accomplishments, he is considered the leading expert on serial killing, mass murder, and other violence-related topics like school violence and workplace violence. He is also, which is something really impressive to me, the founding editor, and I can remember that, of the Journal of Quantitative Criminology, which is quite an accomplishment. In addition to that, as a tribute to his popularity at Northeastern, he became the dean of the School of Criminal Justice at Northeastern and was dubbed the Dean of Death by none other than USA Today. So this is very exciting for me to have Dr. Fox here, and I hope you enjoy his presentation. So I will turn it over to him. Oh, and before I go, one more thing. If you have any questions, please submit them to the Q&A feature on Zoom or the chat feature, and I will give them to him at the end of his presentation. So remember, Q&A or chat.
Well, thank you, Larry. Larry is an old friend from many, many years ago, a very, very good friend. I should say something about the Dean of Death moniker that the USA Today gave me years ago. You know, when I do speaking in public, people sometimes laugh about that, and you probably did, but you're all muted, so who knows? But people ask if I like it. Well, I do. That's why I keep it in my resume there. I like it. It's very fitting. I wear dark clothes a lot, like today. I usually wear just all black, but I brightened it up today with a little bit of gray for the special occasion. But my wife, she hates it. I think it's because I call her the Duchess of Death, and I call my son the Duke of Death. But I like it, so that's okay. Anyway, so I'm going to be talking about indeed a deadly topic today, and part of the reason why I got that nickname. I'll be talking about mass killing, particularly mass shooting. And I'm going to use slides here, so let me try to share my screen. All right, so It's nice to see you all. Well, not to see you all, but you're there somewhere. Maybe I will when we're done. I have started, I did start studying this topic 40 years ago. And I use this just to show that I indeed, it was 40 years ago because I look so much younger there, sitting in a graveyard with my colleague, Jack Levin, that when we did our first book, Mass Murder, America's Growing Menace. Well, actually, that book was about serial killing as well. In the early 1980s, when we wrote this book, the term serial killing didn't even exist. So we wrote about serial killing, mass shooting, etc. So the thing about it is, back then, no one cared about mass shootings. The criminologists didn't care, the public didn't care. All they wanted to do was talk about the killer bees, Bundy, Bianchi, Bittaker, all those serial killers of the day. Those people were fascinated about serial killers, but they had no interest in mass shootings. It's not like we didn't have them. I mean, back in the 80s, early 90s, we had the McDonald's massacre, 21 killed in McDonald's in California, which the New York Post called the Big Mac attack in the usual style of headlines. We had the 14 killed at a post office in Edmond, Oklahoma, which was the first of a series of shootings at post offices that gave rise to the term going postal. And we even had an elementary school. People hardly remember that. When Sandy Hook happened, they forgot about the elementary school in 1989 in California, where 5 were killed and 30 were injured. And then one of the largest mass shootings at a cafeteria on Secretary's Day in Texas, when 23 people were killed. So there were killings back then, big ones, but no one really paid much attention. Well, that all changed in 2012, which became the watershed year. That was when we had, bad things happen in threes, they say, and there were absolutely 3 bad things. We had the shooting at Oikos University in California, 9 were killed. We had the shooting at the movie theater in Aurora, Colorado, and of course, the Sandy Hook school shooting in Connecticut, where 26 were killed, including 20 young children. Things were so bad then that the Associated Press named mass shootings as the #1 story of the year, particularly Sandy Hook, the #1 story of the year. It eclipsed the other Sandy, remember Hurricane Sandy, Superstorm Sandy, which actually killed more people than were killed at Sandy Hook. But the difference was the Sandy Hook killed a bunch of children, and the hurricane primarily killed adults and some older adults. So people started really thinking about mass shootings back starting in 2012. We woke up to that whole topic. And since then, it has remained a big topic. In fact, just to measure public interest, I did Google Trends. This is the extent to which people are searching online through Google various topics. And I compared mass shooting as a search term to homicide. Homicide being sort of a control here, because more and more people were using Google, so I had to adjust for that. But as you can see, prior to 2012, there was really no interest in mass shootings. A little bit of a blip in 2007 when we had the Virginia Tech shooting, but virtually no interest. Then starting in 2012, it really ramped up. In fact, now more people are Googling mass shootings than they are homicide. So clearly there's a lot of interest out there. And there's a lot of fear. And this thought that there's an epidemic out there. So, for example, Joe Scarborough, I watch him every morning. I like the show quite a bit. We're in the midst of an epidemic of mass shootings, he said in 2018. And Beto O'Rourke, who, as you know, ran for president, not successful, was a little bit colorful language, talked about an epidemic. And lots of people are using this term. I'm not so sure it's an epidemic or how we really define an epidemic, but I kind of question it, as you'll see. But what is clear is there is an epidemic of fear. Fear is out of control. Fear is rampant. As you can see, the survey done every year by Chapman University, their fear index, that a percentage of people who identified fear of mass shootings basically tripled in just a few years. USA Today poll, 21% of Americans say that they avoid certain places, certain public events, because they're afraid of being killed in a mass shooting. And 6 out of 10 Americans, according to ABC News poll, say that they fear that there'll be a mass shooting in their community. And even more astonishingly is that 1/4 of the public believe that mass shootings account for more gun deaths in this country than suicide, accidental shootings, and all other homicides not related to mass shootings. I will tell you right now that that's absolutely so far from the truth, but 1/4 of the people believe it. So, and because of fear, people really are on edge. We have all these incidents actually of people starting to run and scared because they think there's an active shooter, when it turns out to just to be a balloon popping. Simmons College, which is near me, they closed down the whole area, and hospitals in the area when they thought there was an active shooter. All the TV trucks were there, but it was just a birthday party where a balloon had popped. And actually, there was one down in Florida, just I remember not that long ago, in Boca Raton. They closed the entire mall when people started thinking there was an active shooter when it was just a balloon. And even more astonishingly, about 2 years ago, in Myrtle Beach on July 4th, they had their annual fireworks display on the beach. Thousands of people were there. And when the fireworks started, someone yelled active shooter, and thousands of people started running. It wasn't a shooter, it was the fireworks that they had come to see. So clearly people are afraid. Now I'm going to show you some charts, and as Larry told you, I'm really a quantoid. I love statistics, and an overdose of statistics when it comes to murder is math murder, and I don't want to do that to you guys, but we have to look at some data just to understand and provide some perspective here. I am one of the principals in what's called the Associated Press USA Today Northeastern University mass killing database. We collect data on every mass killing, not just shootings, but mass killings without guns. About 20% of mass killings do not involve guns. And these are cases of 4 or more people killed. All right. Data, we go back to 2006, and there really hasn't been much of a change, hardly epidemic. In fact, when you break it down by type, 45% of mass killings are family annihilations. A husband, father kills the wife and all the kids. Those don't make headlines. Those don't tend to scare people because that's not their family. They don't quite identify with that. And then about 20% are robberies, where the robbers execute the witnesses, or gang-related killings, or killings related to drug trafficking. The rarest form actually is the public mass shooting, the ones that people fear in restaurants and shopping malls and churches and synagogues and schools. Those are relatively rare. They occur on average about 6 times a year in a population of about 330 million. Of course, but there has been an uptick, as you can see in the red line there. Around 2017, 18, we have the numbers went up to as high as 10. We know those cases. There have been some large ones, as you'll see. So we have seen this increase, although in 2020, one of the silver linings of the pandemic is that we didn't have public mass shootings. Public venues were closed. The old restaurants were open, they were welcoming lots of people. Churches were closed. Concerts, no concerts. And we didn't have mass shootings in public places. Schools were closed. Unfortunately, 2021 has started out, I hate to use the term, but with a bang, a bad bang. We've had 5 already, 5 public mass killings so far this year in 2021. So things are getting back to normal, and that's true when it comes to mass killings, unfortunately. Now, in terms of the people killed, we have seen, as you can see, since 2016, an uptick in the number of people killed in public mass shootings. Again, the ones that people fear. And a lot of that spike that you see is really related to 4 cases. There have been 4 cases since 2016 of more than 20 people killed. In fact, these are all the mass shootings in American history with 20 or more people killed. And 4 of them occurred since 2016. And that's why we see this spike. Now, it's hard to call that a trend when you're talking about the behavior of the actions of 4 people in the entire country, but it is worrisome. And in addition to those 4 cases of 20 or more, we had a bunch with more than 10 killed. Parkland, of course, 17. Santa Fe school and high school in Texas, that was 10. And we had synagogue in Pittsburgh with 11 and 12 at a bar in California. So things have been bad, to be sure. Well, there is still this disconnect. I mean, yes, there has been somewhat of an increase, but I wouldn't call it an epidemic. And why do we have this disconnect, though, between the rate of mass killings, which isn't that high, really, when you come to think about it? Even the worst year, we had 10 public mass killings, and this notion that we have an epidemic. Why the disconnect between perception and reality? As Jake Tapper said in this interview that I was giving him and telling him, no, that we don't have this epidemic. And he said it was hard to believe. He also couldn't spell my name right, my middle name, but that's okay. Well, it may be hard to believe, and I'll talk about why. Part of 2 basic reasons. One has to do about this conflicting definitions of what is a mass shooting. And second, as I'll get to, the nature of the media coverage. Now, you may have heard about this gun violence archive. It's cited all the time in the press, probably because the numbers are so high that constantly we hear that there are more mass shootings than there are days. In fact, in last year, we had 610. So that really sounds awful. More than one a day. In fact, there was one day a few years ago when there were 15 mass shootings. But they define mass shootings in a different way. They basically, the logic is, well, nothing in the word shooting says death. So they said, well, we're going to define mass shootings as 4 or more people shot. Whether they die or not, that doesn't matter. They're still shot. Well, that's fine. They can define it any way they want to. The problem is that when they illustrate cases, they always use the ones that everybody knows about, the deadly ones. So here in this CBS News, more than 1 mass shooting a day in the United States, but then all the ones they list are mass killings with large body counts. So no wonder people are confused. They get the idea that these kind of killings, like in Las Vegas or Orlando or recently in Colorado and the FedEx facility in Indianapolis, oh, that must be happening more than 1 a day. No, it's not. As I showed you before, those public mass killings with gunfire average about 6 a year, not more than 1 a day. So, in fact, these are the numbers from the Gun Violence Archive that get cited a lot. And the reason they get cited a lot, to be honest with you, the media and the press really tend to promote things that are scary because it obviously gets attention. And when they say there's more killings, mass shootings in days, it gets attention. People read, people watch. The average number of fatalities in these killings is a little over 1. In fact, half of these mass shootings, no one dies. In 3/4 of the mass shootings, either no one or 1 person dies, and only 7% of them would be classified as mass killings with at least 4 people killed. So there's a big difference between what these mass shootings are and what I'm talking about, which is the traditional definition of 4 or more people killed by gunfire. And just the other day, New York Times, they printed a partial list of mass shootings in the United States. And the list is on the left here. All 13 mass killings of 4 or more people. Then they say, oh, this is an incomplete list. You see, there are many, many more. Yeah, but the many, many more aren't like these 13. These 13 are the deadly ones. The many, many more aren't anywhere near the same. Oh, also, I should point out that of these hundreds and hundreds a year, majority of them are family shootings and gang-related shootings, robberies, not public. So problem is there's mass confusion about there. People don't quite don't quite understand the distinction between what the Gun Violence Archive is talking about and mass killings. Then we have a special case of schools. I want to talk about schools for a moment. You may have children in school, you may have grandchildren in school, and obviously when it happens, it's a huge concern. They are our most precious members of our society. When mass shootings happen in schools, it's horrific. And You know, you have to really admire the tenacity of the March for Our Lives, which was after the Parkland shooting, of course. In fact, my wife went to one of these marches that they went in Boston. She was stood on the sideline. Someone handed her a sign. She didn't look at it. She's just holding a sign, and all of a sudden, people came up to her, just hugging her. Everyone was hugging her. Mama, as Larry will tell you, my wife is very cute and huggable. Then she looked at her sign and said, "Arms are for hugs, not for killing." But some of the slogans, like, "I want to go to my graduation, not to my grave." Well, the chance of graduating is much higher than being killed at a school shooting. Let's try to be real here. But fear doesn't recognize that. A majority of US teens worry the school shooting could happen in their school. The majority of them do. So that's this panic among school children. Now, part of panic is because, again, these statistics that are kind of misleading. Every Town for Gun Safety, which is an organization, terrific organization, linked funded by Bloomberg, Michael Bloomberg. They track school shootings, and here they had this website that said that since 2013 there were 312 school shootings in America. That was as of 2018. And if you do the math, and I'm good at math, that comes out to be one a week. One a week. Boy, that's really, really scary. Well, and then Time magazine saying school shootings are becoming a new normal. Well, the question is, what do you mean by school shooting? And I broke it down, actually. I looked at every one of those cases. The problem is that school shootings included suicides, included accidental discharges of firearms, included shootings when no one was hurt, no one was even hit by a gun. And it also included things like a married couple were driving along at night, 11 o'clock at night, they were arguing. The guy pulled into the school parking lot, pulled out a gun and shot his wife at 11 o'clock at night. It wasn't, they had no connection to school. They just went in the school parking lot. That they included. They include anything that was on school grounds, whether or not school is in session. That's kind of misleading, wouldn't you say? This chart shows you fatalities in school shootings. In fact, it was a lot worse back in the early 1990s. That was when a lot of the gang shootings, gang activity spilled into the hallways of our schools. But in the 90s, there were a lot of mass killings in schools, and I'll talk about that in a moment. But more recently, no, numbers have gone down. In fact, on average, even with Parkland and Santa Fe in the data, over the past 6 years, the average number of students killed at school by gunfire is 6.7. Hold on a sec. 6.7 students a year. Now that's awful for the 6.7 students, their families, their neighborhoods, their communities. But let's put that in perspective. There are 55 million school children. So the risk that any student is going to get killed at school by an armed classmate or an armed intruder is 1 in 10 million. Actually, compare that to the fact that there were 30 students who are killed every year commuting to school, either in a bicycle accident, a vehicle accident, a school bus accident, or as a pedestrian. 30 a year. 5 times more kids are killed commuting to school than are shot at school. But you know what's interesting is we don't have a national bicycle helmet law. Only half the states require minors to have bicycle helmets. If we really want to protect our kids, and we should have a national bicycle helmet law. No one seems to think about that, unfortunately. So schools are safe. In fact, for many kids, school is safer than even their home. School provides students with structure, supervision, and yes, there are shootings, but the rate is very low and going down. Now, there's a lot of conspiracy theories out there, including conspiracy theories about schools. You probably know those people who say that Sandy Hook never happened. They're all actors, and they will show you pictures of Columbine and Sandy Hook and claim that they just act the same people, the same picture. Lots of, big events, breed big lies. And it was actually a whopper back in the 1990s when we had this string of school shootings. These, for example, are all the school shootings that occurred during the late 1990s during Bill Clinton's administration. I remember them very well. I was on Clinton's advisory committee on school shootings. Thing was so bad that he had a White House committee on school shootings, and the Department of Education sent out pamphlets to every school in America called warning signs, so they help teachers and principals identify kids who were at risk. Well, this organization, Cutting Edge Ministries, is a right-wing conspiratorial thinking group. They plotted on this map all the school shootings. There's Columbine and Springfield and Pearl, West Paducah. These are all the school shootings during Bill Clinton's years. And they fit perfectly on two straight lines. As Larry will understand, I can never get my regression lines to fit that well. And you know where those two lines meet, where they intersect? Hope, Arkansas, Bill Clinton's birthplace. They claimed that these kids were in cahoots with Bill Clinton to discredit the Second Amendment and have America turn their back on gun ownership. Well, that's kind of bizarre, but that's what they believe, and the website's still up. Now, thinking about that, so there were actually 8 multiple victim school shootings in the late in 5 years, more than we've had in recent years. And in March of 2001, when we had another one in San Diego, Dan Rather announced that school shootings are a national epidemic. And you know what? There wasn't another one for 4 years, not till 2005. You know why? Because 9/11 happened. When 9/11 happened, people stopped thinking and talking and obsessing about school shootings. They stopped sending the message to kids that, yeah, you know, if you're angry with your classmates, bring a gun to school. All we were concerned about and consumed about was Al Qaeda and terrorism from abroad, not terrorism in schoolrooms. And when we stopped obsessing over it, it didn't happen. So I mentioned earlier about this idea about the media. You know, there's old expression of seeing is believing. And when people see these events shown to them on television, they believe that this is an epidemic, because it sure seems like it when you watch television. You know, when Sandy Hook happened, the cameras, the TV cameras, the satellite trucks were there very quickly. And they were there so quickly they beamed live images of students being led out of their classroom with tears still fresh in their eyes into people's living rooms in high definition television. It made it feel like it was just happening down the street. Now, that's what's different. I mentioned before a elementary school shooting in 1989 in Stockton, California. We didn't have satellite trucks back then. And the only cable news channel was CNN, and it didn't have much of a footprint. And the major TV networks, they wouldn't cut into Days of Our Lives to cover a shooting. They had nothing to show. So now, however, because of the nature of the media, and the fact you could be there, it feels differently than it was years ago when we had these events, but they weren't covered in the same way. And I remember very well, for example, the shooting at Virginia Tech. It was actually Marathon Monday in Boston here. I went to the marathon. In fact, I ran the marathon that year. You can all applaud. I can hear you applaud. I'm proud of the fact I ran the marathon, but I ran the width of it. You know, most people do the length, 26.2 miles. I did 26.2 feet across Commonwealth Avenue. But it's okay. I still ran it. And I got home. I turned the television set, and there was this breaking news. And the anchors on CNN were giddy. First, they, oh, there's 6 people killed. Oh, now a report says there are 9. Oh, now it's 15. And now it's the largest school shooting in American history. Oh, no, now it's 30. Now it's the largest shooting of any kind in American history. And they were promoting this in dramatic fashion, as if it wasn't sensational enough. And it's interesting, you know, how that we're always trying to say it's the worst, it's the deadliest, it's the baddest. I mean, and sometimes it's kind of silly, Texas school shooting, which was where 10 were killed in Santa Fe, the deadliest school shooting since Parkland. Well, it was only like 3 months earlier. I mean, 4 people killed would have been the deadliest. Aurora, that movie theater, the state's worst mass shooting since Columbine. Well, it's only in one state, and it's only about 13 years earlier. But they have to call it a record, as if it's more important if it's a record. And I'll tell you a quick story. I was at an event here in my neighborhood, and one of the local anchors was there. And this was right after the shooting at the movie theater in Colorado. And this woman, who the anchor said, "Was that the largest mass killing ever?" I said, "No, that would be the Oklahoma City bombing, 168 people killed." "Oh, that's a bombing," she said. "How about shooting?" I said, "No, that would be Anders Breivik, killed 77 in Norway." "Oh, no, that's the war of Norway. How about the United States?" I said, "No, that was Virginia Tech, 32 people killed." "Oh, well, how about if we take the number of people killed plus the number of people injured, put them together? Is Aurora, Colorado the largest?" I said, "Yeah, I guess to put it that way, yeah." She said, "Good, because that's my lead for tomorrow." She had to find some way to make this a big story that was the worst. Otherwise, I guess it wasn't as much of a story. And the problem with our obsession with records is that records are made to be broken. And we actually challenge people to try to break the record. And in fact, Adam Lanza specifically was trying to outdo his hero, which is Anders Breivik, who killed 77. So we really had to tone it down. In fact, I got into argument with one of the anchors on CNN about this. After the Las Vegas shooting, where 60 were killed, they kept talking about it's the largest, and the bomb the screen, it said the largest, the record. I said, "Would you stop talking about that?" She said, "Well, it is." I said, "I know it is, but you don't have to say it every 5 minutes." Okay, well, these are unspeakable crimes, and some people say we shouldn't speak the names of the criminals, that they don't deserve the attention. And indeed, they sometimes get attention and undeserved stage. This is the New York Times, with all the news that fit to print. And I guess they felt it was fitting to portray the Virginia Tech shooting, not just a headshot, but images of brandishing weapons, like he's very powerful and fearsome, a force to be reckoned with. That's unnecessary, gratuitous. And that kind of attention has led some people to say we shouldn't mention them at all. Anderson Cooper started that several years ago. Not going to mention the name of the perpetrator. Not going to show his face. And that has also been caught on with lots of law enforcement. Prime Minister of New Zealand, after they had shootings at 2 mosques, said we're not going to mention the person's name. And there's a campaign called the Notoriety Campaign. It was a letter signed by 142 criminologists urging the media not to mention killers, mass killers, and don't show their face. I did not sign that. I refused because I don't agree with it. It's part of the story. If you're going to cover the news, how can you not include the name of the perpetrator, the headshot of the perpetrator, information about age and gender and where they got their gun, basic information? It's part of the story. It doesn't make sense that we would exclude that. And you know what? It's not the act, but the actor. I'm sorry, it's not the actor, but the act that like-minded individuals admire and applaud. In fact, I know lots of people interviewed who are white supremacists who know exactly what happened in El Paso and cheered. They have no clue what the guy's name is, and they wouldn't be able to pick his face out of a lineup. In fact, there are very few mass shooters whose names are iconic. Yes, the Columbine killers are, but very few. So we're to stop writing about what happened. It's what happened that like-minded individuals applaud and praise, not the person's name. Now, sometimes the media does go overboard when they get to the level of gratuitous coverage. It goes from news reporting to celebrity watch. For example, the Las Vegas shooter, because we want to know why did he do it, there was so much coverage. We know about his shoe size, what casino games he liked. We know about all of his previous marriages, his previous jobs. We even know what he ate the night of the shooting, because the New York Times wrote about what his meal was, and this picture of him on his high school tennis team has made the rounds, as if that is a warning sign. We can start look. Oh, we got to watch out for people who play high school tennis. I mean, what's the purpose of that? It only humanizes someone to show a picture like that. Oh, so we play tennis. Big deal. I talked about this on this other interview with CNN, and she wasn't very happy when I said, "Can we stop turning these people into celebrities? It's okay to mention the name, show the face, but all that we know more about the shooter in Las Vegas than most of us know about our next door neighbor, and that's really sad." So. Also, we should stop calling these everything that's a killer writes a manifesto. They're not manifestos. You look it up in the dictionary. A manifesto is an important piece of writing. It's a political statement by someone of prominence, not a killer. In fact, the one true thing that Dylan Roof, the shooter in South Carolina church, said was, "Stop calling writing a manifesto. It's not what it is." Thank you, Dylan. But the media keeps doing that. And the way things are covered, constantly showing over and over and over again images of people running and screaming and bullets, sound of gunfire. That just does two things, and they're both bad. One, for most Americans, when we watch those videos of the shooting scene, it puts us there. It's scary. It intensifies our fear. Two, there are some people out there who watch those video coverage and they'd love to see that happen in their neighborhood, so long as they're on the back of the gun. They find it thrilling, exciting. The way coverage should focus, the focus should be more on resilience and strength, not suffering. For example, the stories about the people of El Paso lining up to give blood after the shooting there, for people that were total strangers to them. That's the kind of story El Paso is strong that we should focus on, not the suffering, not the pain. All right, now I want to talk just a little bit because I have just a few more minutes here. Besides the idea of trying to shift the tone of the media coverage from pain to strength, there are other things we should do. Unfortunately, sometimes we doing the right thing, but for the wrong reason. For example, I'll talk about two. I'll be talking about mental health and guns. In the wake of mass shootings, we constantly hear this narrative that, well, we need to improve access to mental health treatment. So get these guys help. Well, first of all, mass shooters, they see themselves as the victim of injustice. Oh, the boss doesn't give me the right assignments. I don't get the pay raise I deserve. Oh, the wife doesn't understand me. They think that everyone else is getting the breaks, not them. They want treatment. They want fair treatment. They don't want psychological treatment. If you offer to them, they're not going to take you up on it anyway, because they don't think there's anything wrong with them. It's other people who are to blame. The company, maybe even all of society is to blame, not them. But then, for example, this idea that Barack Obama, this is shortly after the shooting at Sandy Hook. He went up to Hartford, gave a speech, said we need to help people struggling with mental health problems get the treatment they need before it's too late. Well, why? Is it because we're so concerned about the well-being of the mentally ill? Or is it because we're so concerned about the well-being of the people they may shoot? It's really the latter. And all this really does is to emphasize and reinforce the stigma about mental illness. I will tell you that very few mass shooters are severely mentally ill. They may be depressed, upset about how things are going at work or in the families, but not mentally ill. In fact, the statistics are about 11%. Someone who's truly impaired generally doesn't have the ability to carry out a methodical plan of attack. In fact, there was a guy out in Wisconsin who wanted to commit a mass shootings. He left all these videos saying what he was going to do, and he drove his car to the McDonald's in Kenosha, Wisconsin, got out, closed the door, and so confused he locked all of his ammunition inside the car, and his keys were in there as well. So he only had a few bullets. He killed one person. He didn't have the ability to carry out this methodical plan. So it's a myth that this is a big connection. Also, you see, we should improve access to mental health treatment. That will benefit millions of Americans. It's the right thing to do, but not for this reason. Why don't we talk about that on some random Tuesday when there hasn't been a mass shooting? Why do we only talk about it after a mass shooting? Guns. You know, one thing that mass shootings do is they energize the discussion about guns. One side wanting more gun control, the other side wanting more concealed carry laws, or permitted concealed carry rights. Well, I fall on the gun control side, but I will tell you that many of these ideas here on the screen are great things. They will impact the rate of gun violence in America that we see every day. You know, there were 32 people who were killed in El Paso and the day after in Dayton. That one weekend, August 3rd and 4th, 2019, 32 people. It was shocking. That's the average number of people killed in America by gunfire in a homicide every day. Those are the cases that we can impact. The thing about mass shooters, they're very determined individuals. They will find a way to carry out their plan. It's not a sudden impulse to kill. It's a plan that goes on for weeks and months. And they will find a way no matter what. Now, we can make it more difficult for them, but generally they'll find the means to get the weapon they want. But these things still should be done because they will impact the rate of gun violence generally. It's just not as visible, I suppose. Are things like the assault weapons ban. I know that Bill Clinton liked to say because they did not renew the gun, the federal assault weapons ban did not renew it in 2004. That's why we started all these mass shootings. Well, actually, that's not the case. Assault weapons ban, the rate did not change. And that's because most mass shooters don't use assault weapons. Most of them use semi-automatic handguns, like Glocks. I know the word semi-automatic is misunderstood. Lots of people think that's equivalent to assault weapon. No, semi-automatic. Most guns are semi-automatics, not automatics. It's semi-automatics. Although they may be equipped with a large capacity magazine. For example, the 8 shootings I showed you earlier with 20 more killed. 2 of them used handguns, but they had a large capacity magazine attached to them. The Virginia Tech shooting, for example, used a Glock handgun. And I have done some research showing that states that have bans on large capacity magazines have seen a reduction in the rate of mass shootings. Now, I did a podcast about a year ago, and for Reason.com, and the person, the interviewer, sort of tweeted out this idea that I said that we're not an epidemic of mass shootings. Well, this one person in the White House kind of liked that and retweeted it. My wife was really angry about it. I guess I wasn't so angry, although it wasn't. I'm not a supporter, but it was kind of interesting that he would like what I said, but he liked it for the wrong reason. He presumed that when I say it's not an epidemic, meant we didn't have to do anything. We didn't have to do gun control. Well, I don't agree with that. I think we do. It's just for other reasons. So thank you for the attention. And the large number of people now who follow me, my Twitter feed, because of the president having done this, but I don't agree. Now, can we stop mass shootings? Yeah, we could. I don't think we will, but we could. Yeah, we could round up all the guns out there in circulation. round up all the people who scare us, all the people who wear black clothing like me, people who never smile, who write ugly words on the internet, people who play violent video games excessively. Round them all up. I don't know if we're going to put them. And abolish the Second Amendment, of course. We could virtually eliminate mass shootings by doing all these things, but we're not going to. People say, well, we need to be like Australia, because Australia in 1996 had a big mass shooting, and after that, they virtually eliminated private gun ownership. And they didn't have any more until actually 2 years ago. But we're not Australia. We're not like Australia in so many ways. And certainly, we're not going to see the day where we don't have a Second Amendment. And the thing is, that unfortunately, we have, as I said, mass shooting is a rare phenomenon. The number of people killed in a year in mass shootings, it's on average about 100, 150. It's less than 1% of all homicides. Unfortunately, these few deaths are the price that we pay for the freedoms that we treasure. So anyway, we could stop it, but I don't think we will. So let me leave it at that. My time is run up, but I do have time for questions. And I'm going to turn off my slides here so you can see my face again, which again looked much older than the one at the beginning of the slides.
Well, I guess I'm the question guy. Can you hear me okay?
Sure can.
Okay, first I'd like to ask one, and since I think I'm entitled, and that is, or maybe two, is what you mentioned over and over again, that there's a lot of sensationalism in the news, and they want to jack up the numbers to make it a lead story and everything else. Do you think that sensationalism actually encourages a mass shooter who might not have gone over the edge to do so because of all the attention they get?
Well, actually, I have an article that was just accepted on Friday that looked at the contagion of mass shootings and looked at the amount of media coverage of the topic of mass shootings in the month leading up to one and the month after one. And not surprisingly, when there is a mass shooting, there's lots of coverage in the following weeks. But there's not any run-up in coverage prior to them. The media does not create the contagion. What really does create the contagion is what I talked about before, is our obsession with it. You know, when we have political debates, they talk about mass shootings. I mean, crimes, as you know, Larry, there are millions of crimes in this country. And we're focusing presidential election debates. We talk about a mass shooting where we're a handful of cases. So that's where the contagion comes from, not the media. I don't want to, whitewash the media, because as I said, sometimes they do go overboard and they turn killers into celebrities. That has to stop. There are some mass killers who follow in the footsteps of their heroes. Have a hero that, like I mentioned, Adam Lanza, whose hero was Andrei Breivik. There are those cases, but most mass shooters really aren't don't have heroes of other mass shooters. There's a handful who do, but most just do it because they have their own reasons to. And that we have now keep on suggesting mass shootings as a new normal. That's what we tell people, that you're angry at the boss, you're angry at the wife, you know what to do. The new normal. That's where the problem is. I don't think it's the fact that the media covers these cases. They have to. That's their job. It's news.
Let me read a question from somebody else. Jerome Spivak says, is there information on the age and sex of mass shooters other than domestic violence? Is there any profile of mass shooters, in other words?
Well, as far as gender, not surprisingly, 95% are male, but then 90% of murderers are male. Murder is a male avocation. There are female mass killers, but if you actually want to take away family ones, the female mass killers we have are generally ones who kill their whole family. There've been a couple of female mass, Rambo style, super commando style. There's one, for example, at a shopping mall in Springfield, Pennsylvania, several years ago. But it's generally men, and there's lots of reasons why men are more violent. Men tend to use violence as an offensive weapon. Women tend to see violence as a last resort, use it for self-defense. Men are trained in the military. Men are much more comfortable around guns. It's a male activity. As far as age, they're older than murderers generally. The peak age for murder is 20. That's the average age of murders in the country. Mass shooters, mass murders, older. Not just family ones, because a guy has a wife and kids, he's certainly more than 20. But you have workplace killers, for example, who lose their job and they're 40, 45, 50 years old. They feel hopeless and despair. They don't think there's another opportunity for them. Or others who just, it takes years and years to develop the kind of frustration and disappointment that gets you to the point where you are so miserable that you don't want to live anymore, but others have to pay, and you take others with you. So it's a 20-year-old loses a job, hey, take that job and shove it. He'll get equally well-paying job at the Burger King down the street. A 50-year-old loses a job, it's a different story. So mass shooters are older than average age about 37.
Wow. Now, Joan Carter wants to know, so considering everything you've said, should we not be concerned about mass shooting and injuries and death? Or is it, you're saying they're so rare? I mean, should we be more worried about automobile accidents, I guess?
No, we should be concerned about homicide. If 5 people are killed by one individual, we pay a lot of attention. If 5 people are killed by 5 different individuals, we don't pay as much attention. They're still dead. And we should focus, I talked about all the different gun control strategies, right thing to do, improving the safety net in this country, right thing to do, improving mental health treatment, right thing to do. Will that prevent mass killings? I'm not sure, like the public ones. So instead of 6, it goes to 5 or 4. We won't even notice a change like that, but we still should do it. In the process, we might prevent 1 or 2 of these cases a year. But in the process of trying to do that, will probably impact many more regular, mundane, everyday homicides. So we shouldn't ignore it, but we should try to keep it in perspective. Not be led by fear. We should be led by reason.
Now, I have a question, which I'm curious about, so maybe you can answer it. Obviously, the COVID crisis is a black swan event, and I know that murder and crime in general has come down in the last 20 years. So up until the year 2020, it was generally accepted that the crime rate had really dropped significantly. But all of a sudden in 2020, you get this thing, we keep reading murder, even if it isn't mass murder, because private and public places aren't open, but there's been a plethora of shootings in major cities, New York, Chicago, Detroit. And I think the assumption is that, well, people are locked in together. Most people kill each other, knew each other, and you're locked in the apartment. Eventually somebody pulls a gun out and shoots somebody. Do you agree with that? What is the COVID effect and what on mass shootings as we go forward? Let's put it that way.
If you look at the homicide numbers month by month in 2020, the peak was late April, May, early June. And a lot of it had to do not with just people being cloistered together and getting into conflict, but also the fact that people were idle. Schools were closed. Kids weren't, supposed to be in school last spring, but they weren't. They weren't remoting either. They had too much free time in their hands. People were out of work. They were at home. Maybe they work remotely. Maybe they didn't. You know what they say about idle hands, the devil's workshop. People had too much free time in their hands, too much time to get into bad situations. Plus, we had a lot of conflict over politics, over racial issues. Lots of things came together. wife will get that. But if you look then around October, November to December, the numbers came back down again. As the country started opening up, as people started getting busy again, the murders started to drop. So I think it's the big spike in 2020 was really a late spring, early fall, beginning of the pandemic, less so in the fall. I expect things will return to normal crime-wise as we return to normal society-wise.
So you see COVID as a black swan, like I do, that it's just a blip in an otherwise decreasing crime rate. Now, Gary,
and one of the things, you can't declare a trend based on 1 year.
sure.
The thing is that when problem is that the FBI, every time they come up with crime statistics, say, well, last year there's, crime went up by 20% or down by 5%. It's always this year compared to last. Well, that's when crime goes up by a lot, it's sometimes because the previous year was so good. When crime goes down, sometimes because the previous year was so bad. We don't do that with the stock market. No, stock market went up 600 points. Oh, we're all rich. Then they go down again. So there's lots of fluctuations, as you know, in crime rates every year, and we shouldn't get carried away by 1 year. That's what happened actually in 2016 during the presidential campaign. We had a spike in 2016, and the Republican candidate basically won votes on this idea about crimes out of control. He said we had the largest crime rate in decades. Well, that wasn't quite right. It was the largest percentage increase in decades, only because the numbers were so small. But it went away the following year. So don't make too much of 1 year's numbers.
Okay, now
Like the weather. If you don't like the weather, wait a minute. If you don't like the crime rate, wait a year.
that's only New England, Jamie. In Florida, it's pretty consistent.
Well, you have hurricanes. If you don't like the hurricane, wait till the eye comes.
And I'm going to try. If I don't pronounce this, forgive me. Kishore Kulkarni writes, Kulkarni. What is that? Or let me paraphrase. Let me read it. Isn't the total homicide rate in the USA very high compared to other Western countries? Is the mass murder rate equally high compared to other Western countries?
Yes, we're higher. We don't have a monopoly on mass killings, but we certainly have cornered the market. There are, there was last week there was a big school shooting in Russia. There's been major mass shootings in Germany and in England, and they happen all around the world, but we have more of them per capita than other countries do. Other countries have a lot more political violence, more than we do. We have more pathological violence, I guess you could call it. Individuals, not for political reasons or political gain, but for personal gain, committing mass shootings. So yes, we have more per capita, and of course we have more guns in the hands of Americans than we have guns. Than we have people. We have more guns in the hands of Americans than we have people. 350 million guns, more than we have people. Of course, there's some people with 15 of them, which means 15 other people don't have to have them. But we do have an obsession with guns. It's long-standing, and that is not going to change, unfortunately. It would be. I do hope that we see some progress in the Congress, particularly towards universal background checks. But that's not going to prevent everything. I just recently was in Texas testifying in a civil suit involving a shooting at a church in Sutherland Springs, Texas, where 26 were killed and 22 were injured. And the case had to do with the fact that when the shooter 5 years earlier had been in the Air Force, he had been court-martialed, convicted for domestic violence, and the Air Force had not reported that to the FBI, and he was then able to buy a gun legally at a gun shop in Texas. And the claim then is that the government is to blame for getting the gun. Well, the fact is that there are lots of ways that people can get guns. In fact, 1/3 of mass shooters are prohibited purchasers. They either have criminal records or history of psychiatric treatment. 2/3 don't. 2/3 can buy guns legally. The 1/3 that can't buy them legally, they still get them at gun shows, at online sales, ghost guns, stolen guns. So we should have universal background checks. It will help, but it's not going to eliminate the problem. It's just going to reduce it.
And let me just follow it up, Jerome Spivak, to your analysis of the America compared to other industrial countries. I mean, again, do you think the murder rate is higher in America? Just simply, is that the reason, the prevalence of guns?
It's a reason. It's not. Nothing's the reason. It's multiple reasons, as you know. We're a melting pot that's boiling over. And we don't. Some other countries, people have a attachment to their neighbors because their neighbors are just like them. But in our country, it's not that way. We also have an eclipse of community. When you go back a few decades ago, if your neighbor was out of a job, you'd walk over with a casserole and say, anything I can do to help. Nowadays, you don't even know that your neighbor's working or not. You don't even maybe not know his name. And so this eclipse of community means a lot of people are alone. A lot of people, when they're suffering, don't have support system in their lives. That's a big problem. Not just from mass shootings, but suicide and other problems.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and I think, and maybe you could address this, but speaking from my own life where my kids are scattered around, but in the past, I always thought that families lived in close proximity when you talk about people helping you out when you were having problems. Now, families are scattered, all over the place, typically, and at least, and the people I talk to always say, I'm going to visit my kids in California, and then I'm going to go to New England, and and so on. So I think that jives with what you're saying about the lack of support, not only from your neighbors, but from your immediate family.
And it's the draw of the sun in Florida. You're taking all these Northerners and Midwesterners, tight-knit families, and you're breaking them apart by drawing their elders down to Florida, where in the earlier era, the elders would live next door.
Yeah.
On the top floor of a triple-decker.
Well, you should know that the other day, the local paper called Naples the sixth borough because all the New Yorkers are moving here. So I don't know if that's true. Well, does anybody else have a last question of Dr. Fox that you want to get
my information if they want to get in touch with me? First of all, my website, where I can read all my columns, by the way, is jamesalanfox.com, JAMESALANFOX.com. And my email is easy. It's j.fox@northeastern.edu.
All right. Well, I can't thank you enough, James Alan Fox, for doing this presentation. It really meant a lot to me, and I know it meant a lot to the people who are viewing it. So thank
Larry,
you.
hold on, Matt, when we're done, if you wouldn't mind.
Oh.
Okay. Well, thank you all for listening. However many people are still out there, of course, I don't know. I could be talking just to Larry.
Oh, there's a but. Okay. Yeah, be careful what you say. So. Well, we have a last question. Is there one more?
Sorry?
Or are we done with that? I think we're.
Are we done?
That's a good question. I mean, do you think, is there a jurisdictional, like do gun restrictions in different states are different? Are some states more mass murder prone? That's a good one for me.
Absolutely.
By population controlling.
Yeah. I published an article last year. Looked at the rate of mass shootings state by state and correlated that with a whole variety of gun laws, gun restrictions. And permit to purchase, states that had permit to purchase, which is basically even better than universal background checks. States that had those had lower rates. And then in terms of when there were mass shootings, the states that had large capacity magazine bans, when there were such killings, the average number of people killed were lower. So there are things that states do that help. but they still have them. I mean, there's nothing's going to make it go away, short of making guns go away.
Well, okay. All right. Thank you again.
Thank you.